At 7:45 on the morning of September 19th, 1944, Lieutenant Edwin Leiper reached the summit of Hill 246 near Arracourt-la-Petite, France, watching a column of German Panther tanks emerge from the fog less than 800 yards away. 26 years old, 3 months in combat, 4 M18 Hellcats under his command. The Germans had sent the entire 113th Panzer Brigade to smash the American bridgehead at Arracourt. 90 Panther and Panzer IV tanks against a handful of American armor scattered across the fog-covered hills of Lorraine. Leiper commanded the 3rd Platoon of Charlie Company, 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion. His 4 M18 Hellcats weighed 17 tons each. The Panthers rolling toward him weighed 45. His armor was half an inch thick. Theirs was over 3 inches on the front. A German 88mm shell could punch through his entire vehicle and exit the other side without slowing down. Tank destroyer crews in France had learned the mathematics of survival, and the numbers were brutal. The M18's 76mm gun could not penetrate a Panther's frontal armor at any range beyond point blank. Meanwhile, the Panther's high-velocity cannon could destroy an M18 from over a mile away. American tank destroyer battalions in Normandy had lost vehicles at a rate that made replacement crews reluctant to climb inside. The open-topped turret left gunners exposed to artillery fragments, grenades, and sniper fire. Men died before they ever saw an enemy tank. But the M18 had one advantage the Germans could not match: speed. The Continental radial engine pushed the Hellcat to 55 miles per hour on roads, making it the fastest tracked vehicle in the entire war. More critically, the M18's turret rotated 360 degrees in 24 seconds using an electro-hydraulic traverse system. The Panther's turret was hydraulic, but dependent on engine speed. At idle, a Panther needed 60 seconds for a full rotation. Even at combat revolutions, the German tank required 15 to 19 seconds. In close-range fighting, that difference meant life or death. The fog that morning reduced visibility to less than 100 feet in places. German tankers could not use their superior long-range guns. They could not spot American positions from a safe distance. They had to advance blind, hoping to find the enemy before the enemy found them. Leiper's platoon had been pulled from the front lines the night before. They had spent 2 weeks manning combat outposts north of Arracourt, using their machine guns against German night patrols. No tank engagements, no major action. The crews had expected rest. Instead, at 0730, the communications officer had rushed in with orders to alert immediately. Minutes later, Colonel Clark, the Combat Command A commander, had ordered Leiper to follow Captain William Dwight to establish a blocking position on Hill 246. Now, 4 M18s faced the entire German armored thrust. Sergeant Stacy commanded the lead Hellcat. Sergeant Henry Hartman commanded another. Both men had trained with the M18 since England. They knew what their vehicles could do. They also knew what the Panther could do to them. If you want to see how Leiper's 4 Hellcats fought 90 German tanks, please hit that like button. It really helps us share these forgotten stories. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Leiper. A single Panther emerged from the tree line at the base of the hill. Then another. Then a third. The fog swirled around their hulls as they climbed toward the American position. Stacy's gunner had already acquired the lead tank through his periscope. The range was closing fast. At this distance, the 76mm gun could penetrate Panther side armor, but the Germans were coming head-on. Frontal armor. The worst possible angle. Leiper had seconds to decide. Engage now and reveal their position, or wait for the Panthers to turn and expose their flanks. The first option meant certain detection. The second meant gambling that 45-ton tanks would not spot 4 American vehicles sitting on a hilltop in thinning fog. Stacy did not wait. His gunner fired the first shot at 7:47. The 76mm armor-piercing round struck the lead Panther just below the turret ring where the armor was thinnest. The German tank shuddered and stopped. Smoke poured from the hatches. No crew emerged. The second Panther was already traversing its turret towards Stacy's position. The German gunner had spotted the muzzle flash through the fog, but the Panther's hydraulic system needed time. The turret moved at 6 degrees per second. Stacy's loader had already slammed another round into the breech. His gunner had already shifted aim. The M18's electric traverse whined as the turret snapped 15 degrees right. 2 seconds. The American gun fired again. The second Panther took the hit through the front sprocket, immobilizing it. A follow-up shot penetrated the hull. German tank commanders were now shouting into their radios. They knew American guns were on the hill. They did not know how many. The fog made counting impossible. Panthers began fanning out, attempting to flank the position they could not see clearly. This was exactly what the M18 crews needed. Tanks turning meant tanks exposing side armor. Hartman's Hellcat engaged a Panther that had rotated 45 degrees while searching for targets. His gunner put a round through the thinner side plate at 400 yards. The German tank brewed up instantly, ammunition cooking off in a column of fire, visible even through the fog. Hartman's loader was already reaching for the next shell. The crew had trained to sustain 20 rounds per minute under ideal conditions. Combat was not ideal. Fear slowed hands. Spent casings cluttered the turret floor. But Hartman's crew maintained a rate that kept German tankers reacting instead of attacking. A third M18, commanded by a sergeant whose name the records do not preserve, engaged 2 more Panthers attempting to reverse back into the wood line. Both German tanks had realized they were outmaneuvered. Both had begun turning to retreat. Neither completed the turn. The American gunner hit the first through the engine compartment. The second took a round through the turret rear as it exposed its back while pivoting. 5 Panthers destroyed in 5 minutes. 4 M18 Hellcats still operational. Then the Germans found their range. A Panther that had remained stationary in the tree line fired at Stacy's vehicle. The 88mm shell struck the M18's hull. At 17 tons with half-inch armor, the Hellcat had no chance of absorbing the impact. The round penetrated the fighting compartment. Stacy and his crew survived, wounded but alive. Their vehicle could still move under its own power. Stacy ordered his driver to reverse toward Arracourt for medical attention and repairs. 3 Hellcats remained on Hill 246. The fog was beginning to thin. German tank commanders could now see shapes on the hilltop. They could count muzzle flashes. They knew they faced only 3 enemy vehicles. The Panthers regrouped at the base of the hill. More armor was arriving from the east, rolling along the Metz-Strasbourg road in a column that stretched back into the mist. Leiper assessed the situation. His platoon had just destroyed 5 tanks in their first engagement. They had lost 1 M18 to damage, though the crew had escaped. The mathematics still favored the Germans overwhelmingly. Dozens of Panthers and Panzer IVs were converging on Arracourt from multiple directions. His 3 remaining Hellcats could not hold this position against a concentrated assault. But retreating meant abandoning the high ground. It meant letting German armor roll unopposed toward the American headquarters at Arracourt. It meant gambling that other units could stop what his platoon could not. Leiper ordered his 3 Hellcats to displace to a neighboring height. They would find new firing positions. They would use the remaining fog and the terrain to stay hidden. They would continue killing Panthers until they ran out of ammunition or luck. Hartman's crew had fired 4 rounds so far. They had 41 remaining. The morning was just beginning. The 3 Hellcats reached their new position on a ridge overlooking the road between Arracourt and Bézage-la-Petite by 8:15. From this height, Leiper could see German armor moving in a long column through the valley below. The fog had lifted enough to reveal the scale of the enemy advance. Panthers, Panzer IVs, half-tracks, and support vehicles stretched back toward the eastern horizon. The 113th Panzer Brigade was committing everything to this attack. Leiper positioned his 3 M18s in a staggered line along the ridge. Each vehicle had clear sight lines to the road below. Each could support the others with overlapping fields of fire. The range was 600 yards to the nearest stretch of road. At that distance, the 76mm gun could penetrate Panther side armor reliably. The key was catching the Germans in column formation when they could not disperse quickly. Hartman's Hellcat occupied the center position. His gunner had the longest unobstructed view of the road. His loader had already arranged fresh ammunition within arm's reach, shells standing upright in the ready rack for fastest possible access. The M18 carried 45 rounds total. Hartman had 41 remaining after the first engagement. Every shot needed to count. The German column had no idea American tank destroyers occupied the ridge. Their scouts had reported the road clear. Their infantry had not swept the surrounding hills. The Panthers advanced in single file, conserving the road surface for the vehicles behind them. Tank commanders rode with hatches open, watching for aircraft rather than ground threats. The Luftwaffe had lost air superiority over Lorraine weeks ago. American P-47 Thunderbolts owned the skies, but no aircraft were flying this morning. The fog that had begun to lift over the hills still blanketed the airfields to the west. At 8:22, Hartman's gunner reported the lead Panther entering his sights. The German tank was 700 yards out, presenting its full left flank as it followed the curve of the road. The driver was moving at perhaps 15 miles per hour, standard march speed for armored columns. At that velocity, the Panther would remain exposed for approximately 8 seconds before the road curved again and offered partial defilade behind a stone farmhouse. Hartman gave the order to fire. His gunner squeezed the trigger. The 76mm gun roared. The round crossed 700 yards in under a second. It struck the Panther just behind the front road wheel, penetrating the side hull and detonating inside the fighting compartment. The German tank slewed sideways and stopped, blocking the road. The column behind it had nowhere to go. The road was too narrow for the heavy tanks to pass the wreck. The ditches on either side were too soft for 45-ton vehicles. Panthers began reversing, their drivers desperately trying to create distance from whatever had just killed the lead tank. But reversing in column meant chaos. Tanks collided with the vehicles behind them. Engines stalled. Commanders screamed orders that contradicted each other. Leiper's 2 other Hellcats opened fire. The third M18 hit a Panzer IV, attempting to turn off the road. The vehicle bogged immediately in the soft ground, its left track sinking into mud up to the hull. The crew abandoned it before a second round arrived. The fourth M18 engaged a Panther that had successfully reversed 50 yards and was now attempting to traverse its turret toward the ridge. The American gunner fired twice. The first round struck the turret face and ricocheted without penetrating. The second hit lower, punching through the hull machine gun port. The Panther's interior erupted. Hatches blew open from the overpressure. Hartman had already shifted to his second target. Another Panther, this one stationary in the road, its commander standing in the cupola, trying to locate the source of the attack. The German officer was pointing toward the ridge when Hartman's round arrived. The tank died with its commander still pointing. 4 more German vehicles destroyed in 3 minutes, 8 total since dawn. The surviving Panthers finally identified the threat. Turrets began rotating toward the ridge. But the M18s were already moving, reversing behind the crest line before German gunners could acquire them. The shoot-and-scoot tactic that American tank destroyer crews had practiced in training was proving devastatingly effective in the fog-shrouded hills of Lorraine. Fire from concealment, reverse before the enemy can respond, relocate, and fire again. The Germans had designed their Panthers for long-range duels on the open steppes of Russia. They had not prepared for an enemy that appeared, killed, and vanished within seconds. Leiper's 3 Hellcats displaced to a third position by 8:40. They had now occupied 3 different firing locations in less than an hour. Each move kept the Germans guessing. Each new position offered fresh angles on the enemy column, still struggling to advance along the Arracourt road. German tank commanders were reporting contact with American armor, but could not provide accurate counts or locations. Their radio traffic revealed confusion and frustration. Meanwhile, word of the engagement had reached Colonel Bruce Clark at Combat Command A headquarters in Arracourt. Clark had expected the German counterattack. He had not expected a single platoon of tank destroyers to blunt the initial thrust so effectively. Reports filtering back from the forward positions indicated multiple enemy tanks destroyed, American casualties minimal. Clark ordered additional units to reinforce the blocking positions north of Arracourt. Baker Company of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion received orders to move east and support Leiper's platoon. Charlie Company's other platoons were repositioning to cover secondary routes the Germans might use to bypass the killing ground on Hill 246. The entire 704th was now committing to the fight that Leiper's 4 Hellcats had started. On the ridge, Hartman's crew had settled into a rhythm. Acquire target, fire, observe hit, shift to next target. His gunner had developed an intuition for Panther weak points during the morning's engagements. the turret ring, the lower hull sides behind the front road wheels, the engine deck when a tank exposed its rear while turning. Each shot placement maximized the chance of a kill with minimum ammunition expenditure. By 9:15, Hartman had personally accounted for 5 confirmed kills. His loader's arms ached from wrestling 76mm shells into the breech. His gunner's eyes burned from staring through the periscope sight. But the crew kept working. They had trained for this. The M18 had been designed for exactly this kind of engagement. The Germans attempted a flanking maneuver around 1000 hours. A company of Panthers broke away from the main column and pushed north through the fields, attempting to circle behind the ridge where Leiper's Hellcats had been firing from. The soft ground slowed them. Several tanks bogged in the wet soil. Others threw tracks trying to navigate ditches and hedgerows. Leiper spotted the flanking force through his binoculars. He had anticipated this move. Tank commanders facing ambush always tried to envelop the ambush position. The response was simple. Do not stay in the position they were trying to envelop. The 3 M18s displaced again, this time moving south along the back slope of the ridge where German observers could not track them. They emerged on a new height overlooking the bogged flanking force from an entirely unexpected direction. The Panthers were stuck. Their crews were outside the vehicles, some attempting to dig tracks free from the mud, others laying logs under road wheels for traction. Leiper's Hellcats opened fire at 900 yards. The Germans had no chance to respond. 3 Panthers were destroyed before a single crew could remount their vehicle. 2 more took hits that disabled them permanently. The survivors abandoned their tanks and fled on foot toward the tree line. The flanking maneuver had cost the 113th Panzer Brigade 5 more tanks without inflicting a single casualty on the Americans. Back at headquarters, Colonel Clark was receiving reports that seemed too favorable to believe. A platoon of 4 M18s, now reduced to 3, had destroyed over a dozen German tanks in under 3 hours. The enemy advance had stalled. The road to Arracourt remained blocked by burning wrecks. But Clark knew the Germans would not stop. The 113th Panzer Brigade was only one element of the counterattack. More armor was coming from the north and east. The morning's success had bought time. It had not won the battle. German commanders at 113th Panzer Brigade headquarters were struggling to understand what was happening north of Arracourt. Their morning attack had been planned as an overwhelming armored thrust, designed to shatter the American bridgehead. Instead, their lead elements had been systematically destroyed by an enemy force they could not locate, count, or engage effectively. Reports from surviving tank crews were contradictory. Some claimed they had faced a full battalion of American tank destroyers. Others insisted only a handful of enemy vehicles were operating in the area. The fog had made accurate observation impossible. The speed with which American guns appeared and disappeared suggested either a large mobile force or exceptional tactical coordination by a smaller unit. The brigade commander ordered his reconnaissance elements forward. Armored cars and motorcycle infantry pushed into the hills around Arracourt, searching for the American positions that had cost him over a dozen tanks before noon. They found abandoned firing positions, shell casings, track marks in the mud, but no enemy vehicles. The Americans had relocated again. By 1100 hours, German tacticians had identified the pattern. The American tank destroyers were using terrain and mobility to avoid decisive engagement. They struck from unexpected angles, destroyed 1 or 2 targets, then vanished before Panthers could bring their main guns to bear. Countering this tactic required either fixing the enemy in place or catching them during displacement. The brigade commander chose concentration. Rather than advancing in vulnerable columns, he ordered his remaining Panthers to form into company-strength groups. Each group would advance together, turrets covering different sectors. When contact occurred, the concentrated firepower of 12 to 15 tanks would overwhelm whatever small American force they encountered. The new formation moved out at 11:30. 3 Panther companies pushed toward Arracourt along parallel routes, each group maintaining visual contact with its neighbors. Infantry accompanied the tanks on foot, watching for ambush positions in the hedgerows and farm buildings. Artillery observers rode in half-tracks, ready to call fire on any American position that revealed itself. Leiper observed the changed German formation from a concealed position near Bézange-la-Petite. His 3 remaining Hellcats were low on ammunition after 4 hours of continuous engagement. Hartman had 17 rounds remaining. The other 2 M18s had fewer. Resupply had not reached them. Reinforcements from Baker Company were still en route. The concentrated Panther formation presented a problem. Engaging a single tank now meant exposing the M18 to return fire from a dozen others. The shoot and scoot tactic depended on hitting isolated targets before they could respond. Against massed armor advancing together, the mathematics changed dramatically. Leiper pulled his platoon back toward Arracourt. There was no shame in the withdrawal. His 3 Hellcats had accomplished more than anyone had expected. They had blunted the German advance for 4 hours. They had destroyed enough enemy armor to disrupt the entire 113th Panzer Brigade's timetable. They had demonstrated that the M18 Hellcat, dismissed by many as too fragile for tank combat, could kill Panthers consistently when employed correctly. But the battle was not over. The German concentration meant a major armored clash was coming. Panthers in company strength would soon collide with whatever American forces defended Arracourt itself. The scattered M18 platoons that had fought independent actions all morning would need to coordinate. The Shermans of the 37th Tank Battalion, held in reserve near Bazoges-la-Petite, would finally enter the fight. Colonel Clark understood what the German formation change meant. The enemy had absorbed their morning losses and adapted. They were no longer stumbling blind through the fog. They were advancing with purpose toward the decisive terrain. Clark ordered all available tank destroyers to consolidate south of Arracourt. He positioned the 37th Tank Battalion to meet the German thrust head-on. He requested air support from 19th Tactical Air Command, hoping the fog would clear enough for P-47s to intervene. The clock showed 12:15. The fog was lifting across the entire valley. Within the hour, German and American armor would meet in the largest tank battle the Lorraine campaign had yet seen. Leiper's 3 Hellcats would be in the middle of it. Hartman checked his ammunition count one more time. 17 rounds. Enough to kill 17 Panthers if every shot found its mark. Not enough if he missed. The battle for Arracourt reached its climax shortly after 1300 hours. German Panthers from 3 converging columns made contact with American armor along a 2-mile front stretching from Bazoges-la-Petite to the outskirts of Arracourt itself. Over 50 German tanks engaged approximately 30 American vehicles in the largest armored clash on the Western Front since Normandy. The 37th Tank Battalion's Shermans met the German thrust head-on. Their 75mm guns struggled against Panther frontal armor at combat ranges. American tank commanders quickly learned what the M18 crews already knew. Flanking shots were essential. Frontal engagements meant death. Leiper positioned his 3 remaining Hellcats on the American right flank, covering the gap between the 37th Tank Battalion and a company of infantry dug in near a stone farmhouse. His ammunition situation remained critical. The platoon had fewer than 50 rounds combined, but flank position meant flank shots on Panthers focused on the Shermans to their front. Hartman's gunner spotted a Panther company advancing through an orchard 400 yards to the northeast. The German tanks were moving in line abreast, turrets oriented toward the American center where Shermans were already burning. Their left flanks were completely exposed to Hartman's position. The M18 rocked as the 76mm gun fired. The round struck the trailing Panther through the engine deck. Flames erupted immediately. Hartman's loader had the next shell chambered within 3 seconds. The gunner shifted aim to the next tank in line. Another shot. Another kill. The lead Panther in the formation finally began traversing its turret toward the threat on its flank. Too slow. Hartman's 3rd round caught it mid-rotation, penetrating the turret side below the commander's cupola. 3 Panthers destroyed in under 30 seconds. The surviving German tanks scattered, their formation broken. Some reversed toward the orchard. Others pushed forward toward the American center, preferring to face Shermans rather than the unseen killer on their flank. Across the battlefield, similar scenes repeated. Baker Company's M18s had reached positions south of Arracourt and were engaging German armor from hull-down positions along a drainage ditch. A platoon from Able Company caught a Panzer IV column crossing open ground and destroyed 4 vehicles before the Germans reached cover. The M18 Hellcats that skeptics had called too fragile for tank warfare were systematically dismantling the 113th Panzer Brigade. The fog had cleared completely by 1400 hours. American artillery observers could finally see their targets. 105mm howitzers from the divisional artillery began dropping shells on German assembly areas. The P-47 Thunderbolts that Clark had requested arrived over the battlefield at 14:30. 8 fighter bombers dove on the retreating Panther columns, their 500-pound bombs adding to the destruction. German commanders recognized the battle was lost. Their morning attack had failed to reach Arracourt. Their adapted afternoon tactics had failed to overwhelm the American defense. Their tank losses were approaching catastrophic levels. The brigade that had begun the day with 90 operational tanks now counted fewer than 50 still combat-capable. At 1500 hours, the 113th Panzer Brigade began withdrawing toward the east. Panthers that had advanced confidently at dawn now retreated through the same valleys and roads they had tried to conquer. American tank destroyers harassed their retreat. Artillery continued falling. Aircraft made repeated passes until darkness and ammunition exhaustion forced them to return to base. Leiper's platoon remained in position until 16:30. By then, no German tanks were visible anywhere on the battlefield. The Hellcats had fired their last rounds hours earlier. Hartman's M18 was completely dry. His crew had expended all 45 shells they had started the day with, plus additional ammunition scrounged from Stacy's damaged vehicle before it withdrew. The sun was setting over Lorraine when Leiper finally received orders to pull back to Arracourt for resupply and rest. His platoon had been in continuous combat for nearly 9 hours. They had started with 4 M18s. 3 remained operational. They had started with 180 rounds of main gun ammunition across 4 vehicles. They had 0 remaining. Colonel Clark met the returning tank destroyer crews personally. He had received preliminary reports from across the battlefield. The numbers were extraordinary. The after-action reports compiled over the following days confirmed what Colonel Clark had suspected during the battle. Lieutenant Leiper's platoon of 4 M18 Hellcats had destroyed 15 German tanks on September 19th. Most were Panthers. The platoon had lost 1 vehicle to combat damage, with 3 crewmen wounded, none killed. Sergeant Henry Hartman's individual tally stood at 6 confirmed kills. His single M18 had destroyed more German armor in 1 day than most tank destroyer crews achieved in entire campaigns. His gunner had fired with exceptional accuracy under conditions that would have broken lesser crews. His loader had maintained a rate of fire that kept Panthers dying faster than they could respond. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, as a whole, accounted for dozens of enemy vehicles during the Battle of Arracourt. Combined with kills from the 37th Tank Battalion, artillery, and air support, the 113th Panzer Brigade lost over 60 tanks between September 19th and 22nd. The German counterattack that was supposed to smash the American bridgehead had instead been smashed itself. 4th Armored Division Headquarters forwarded commendations for Leiper's platoon to 3rd Army. General George Patton reviewed the reports personally. The performance of the M18 crews at Arracourt validated the tank destroyer doctrine that many officers had questioned. Speed and firepower had defeated armor and numbers. The Hellcat had proven itself against the best tanks Germany could field. The kill-to-loss ratio achieved by M18 units during the Lorraine campaign set records that would stand for the remainder of the war. Across all theaters, the M18 Hellcat would eventually claim 526 confirmed tank kills while losing 219 vehicles, a ratio of 2.4 to 1. No other American tank or tank destroyer matched this effectiveness. The vehicle that critics had dismissed as too lightly armored for combat had become the most successful tank killer in the United States Army. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion continued fighting through the autumn of 1944. They supported 4th Armored Division during the push toward the German border. They fought through the Ardennes during the Battle of the Bulge that December. They crossed the Rhine in March 1945. By war's end, the battalion had earned a reputation as one of the finest tank destroyer units in the European theater. Sergeant Hartman received the Silver Star for his actions on September 19th. The citation noted his destruction of 6 enemy tanks in a single engagement while under continuous fire. It praised his coolness under pressure and his contribution to blunting the German counterattack. The medal recognized what his crew already knew. Hartman had demonstrated exactly what the M18 Hellcat could accomplish in the hands of a skilled and determined crew. Lieutenant Leiper received the Bronze Star for his leadership during the battle. His decision to engage vastly superior forces, his tactical repositioning that kept his platoon alive through 9 hours of combat, and his coordination with other American units had contributed directly to the German defeat. The commendation emphasized that Leiper's 4 M18s had delayed an entire Panzer Brigade long enough for reinforcements to arrive. The broader significance of Arracourt extended beyond individual awards. The battle demonstrated that American armor could defeat German armor even when outnumbered and outgunned on paper. The Panther tank was a formidable weapon, but weapons required crews, and crews required tactics, and tactics required adaptation to battlefield conditions. German tankers had trained for long-range engagements on open terrain. They had not prepared for close-range ambushes in fog-covered hills against an enemy who refused to stand and fight. The M18 Hellcat embodied a different philosophy of armored warfare. Rather than matching the enemy in protection, it exceeded the enemy in mobility. Rather than absorbing punishment, it avoided punishment entirely through speed and concealment. The doctrine was risky. A single hit could destroy an M18. But at Arracourt, the Hellcat crews had proven that not getting hit was a viable survival strategy. Buick had produced 2,507 M18 Hellcats by the time production ended in October 1944. Every one of them carried the same capabilities that Hartman and Leiper had exploited in the hills of Lorraine. An electro-hydraulic turret that rotated faster than any German tank could match. A 76mm gun that killed Panthers from the flanks. An engine that outran anything the Wehrmacht could field. The men who crewed these vehicles knew the risks. They climbed into machines with armor that rifle bullets could penetrate at close range. They fought with open turrets that exposed them to shrapnel and grenades. They accepted these vulnerabilities because the M18 gave them something more valuable than protection. It gave them the ability to choose when and where they fought. And at Arracourt, that choice had made all the difference. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion was deactivated in October 1945, shortly after Germany's surrender. The men who had fought from Normandy to the heart of the Reich returned home to families who could not fully understand what they had experienced. Tank destroyer veterans rarely spoke about the war in detail. The memories were too vivid, the losses too personal. Lieutenant Edwin Leiper survived the war and returned to civilian life. Army records indicate he served with distinction through the final campaigns in Germany, but detailed documentation of his post-war years remains sparse. Like many junior officers who performed extraordinarily in combat, Leiper faded into the anonymity of peacetime America. His actions at Arracourt became a footnote in military history rather than a household name. Sergeant Henry Hartman's post-war path is similarly obscured by time. The Silver Star recipient who destroyed 6 Panthers in a single day left the Army and disappeared into the vast population of veterans rebuilding their lives. No memoirs, no interviews, no documentary appearances. Hartman's story survived only in official records and the memories of the men who served alongside him. The M18 Hellcat itself enjoyed a longer post-war career than its American crews might have expected. The United States Army retired the vehicle from frontline service immediately after 1945, but hundreds of Hellcats were transferred to Allied nations under military assistance programs. Yugoslavia operated M18s until the 1990s. Some saw combat during the Balkan Wars, 50 years after Arracourt. The vehicle that Buick engineers had designed for a specific tactical problem proved adaptable enough to remain relevant across half a century of changing warfare. Today, surviving M18 Hellcats occupy places of honor in military museums across the United States and Europe. The Patton Museum at Fort Knox displayed one for decades. The American Heritage Museum in Massachusetts maintains an operational example. In Arracourt itself, a memorial commemorates the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion and their role in liberating the town. French civilians who remember the battle, or whose parents remembered it, still tend the monument. Military historians have reassessed the M18 Hellcat in recent decades. Early post-war analysis criticized the vehicle's thin armor and questioned the tank destroyer doctrine it embodied. But closer examination of combat records revealed the Hellcat's extraordinary effectiveness when employed correctly. The 2.4 to 1 kill ratio was not an accident. It reflected deliberate design choices that prioritized the factors that actually determine survival in tank combat, not armor thickness, but situational awareness, speed of engagement, and the ability to dictate terms. The Battle of Arracourt itself has gained recognition as one of the most significant American armored victories of the Second World War. 4th Armored Division's defeat of the German counterattack protected Patton's flank during the drive toward the Rhine. It destroyed 2 Panzer brigades that might otherwise have threatened the Allied advance. It demonstrated that American tankers and tank destroyer crews could match German armor in skill as well as numbers. Sergeant Hartman never knew that historians would study his actions 80 years later. Lieutenant Leiper never imagined that his tactical decisions would be taught in military academies. They fought because their country asked them to fight. They excelled because they refused to accept that a 17-ton vehicle with half-inch armor could not defeat a 45-ton Panther. Thank you for watching this story. If you found value in learning about these men and their extraordinary day at Arracourt, please take a moment to like this video. Every like helps us reach more people who appreciate real military history. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from today. We read every single one. The men of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion deserve to be remembered, not as statistics in an after-action report, but as soldiers who faced impossible odds and won.